She's with me.
With me.
The first thing people noticed was his uniform, not the way his shoulders filled the doorway, not the way his eyes moved quiet scanning, measuring distances like a man who fixes things for a living. They noticed the smudged navy work shirt with Hayes HVAC stitched over the pocket. They noticed the faint streak of grease along his forearm. They noticed the toolbox in his hand like it didn't belong in a room dressed in crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes. And then they noticed the silence, because silence doesn't usually exist in rooms like this. It had been loud a moment ago, laughter like glass clinking, words like knives smiling. A woman at the center of it all, sitting too straight, holding her breath as if she could make herself smaller than the humiliation crawling across the white linen tablecloth. Her name was Vivian Sterling. And for the last 5 minutes, the most powerful people at the Crystal Fork had taken turns reminding her she didn't deserve the last name she was born with. Darius Hayes stepped forward anyway. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask for permission. He simply set a glass of water down in front of Vivian, cold enough that tiny beads of condensation formed instantly and ran down the side like quiet tears. Then he looked at the men and women who had been laughing, and he said, calm as a locked door, "She's with me." The entire table froze. You could hear the air conditioning hum in the ceiling like a held breath. A woman in diamonds blinked like she'd been slapped. A man with a watch worth a car tightened his jaw. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" And before anyone could recover, a little girl stepped out from behind Darius's leg. She held a piece of paper in both hands as carefully as if it were a fragile bird. A child's drawing, bright crayon colors, uneven lines, an arching rainbow over 3 stick figures holding hands. She offered it to Vivian, eyes wide and honest. "You look sad," the girl said softly, "but in my picture, you're happy." Vivian's lips parted, the chandelier light caught in her lashes, and for the first time that night her mask cracked. Darius didn't know it yet, but that moment, that simple moment, would break a lineage of cruelty wide open. It would drag old secrets into the light. It would test what kind of man he was willing to be when the world tried to remind him what it thought he was worth. And it would change what family meant for all 3 of them. Because to understand why a black single father in a grease-stained uniform dared to interrupt Manhattan's elite, we have to go back, a few weeks earlier, to a small apartment in Queens, to a little girl with crayons, to a man who had forgotten what it felt like to smile without guilt. Queens didn't sparkle the way Manhattan did. Queens had cracked sidewalks and corner stores and the kind of streetlights that flickered like they were tired too. But inside apartment 4B, above a laundromat that always smelled faintly of soap and hot air, there was warmth. Not the kind that came from a heater. The kind that came from love practiced daily like a habit. Darius Hayes, 35, moved through the morning like a man with 2 clocks inside him. 1 clock counted minutes, lunch money, rent due, the next service call, the cost of a broken compressor. The other clock counted heartbeats, whether his daughter had slept enough, whether she'd eaten, whether she'd smiled today. He stood at the kitchen sink rinsing a dented thermos. The radio on the counter murmured a weather report. "Cold front moving in," he snorted softly. "Cold front," he muttered. "Tell me something I don't know." Behind him, the sound of crayons scratching paper. Darius turned his head and saw Ava at the small table leg, swinging, tongue poking out in concentration. Her hair was braided neatly, his work done the night before with a YouTube tutorial playing, and Ava laughing every time he fumbled. She wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big because she liked the way it felt like a blanket. She was drawing again. She always drew when she wanted to say something big without knowing how. Darius wiped his hands and walked over. "What's that one?" he asked. Ava covered it with her arms like it was classified information. "No peeking." "I'm not peeking," he lied. She narrowed her eyes, suspicious in the way only children can be. Then she shifted her arm just enough for him to see a flash of bright color, an arc of red, orange, yellow. A rainbow. Darius's throat tightened a little because rainbows always made him think of hope, and hope was a dangerous thing when you were raising a child alone. "Is it for school?" he asked, keeping his voice light. Ava shook her head. "It's for you." Darius blinked. "For me?" She nodded seriously. "You need a new picture," she declared. "The fridge has too many bills." That was true. The fridge was a museum of adult stress rent reminders, school notices, a magnet holding a late fee warning. and right in the middle, a photo of Ava missing her two front teeth, smiling like the world was harmless. Darius leaned on the table. "All right," he said, "show me." Ava revealed the drawing like a magician. 3 stick figures stood under a rainbow. One was tall with long arms, one was small with pigtails, and one was, in between, a woman. Darius stared. He tried to pretend it didn't hit him, but it did. Ava watched his face like she was reading a thermometer. "I made it," she said carefully, "so you won't be lonely." Darius's chest tightened. He reached out and tapped the 3rd stick figure. "Who's that?" Ava shrugged, but her eyes were bright with a plan. "A nice lady," she said, "one who makes you smile." Darius let out a short laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ava?" She leaned forward, elbows on the table, suddenly very grown up. "Daddy," she said, lowering her voice like she was negotiating a treaty, "you don't smile like you used to." Darius froze. He could fix an air handler in an hour. He could diagnose a busted capacitor by the sound it made, but he could not fix the way his daughter looked at him sometimes, like she could see the tired underneath his skin. He swallowed. "I smile," he said. Ava's expression didn't change. "You smile with your mouth," she corrected, "not with your eyes." Darius looked away. In the window, the city reflected back at him, gray sky, distant sirens, people rushing. His wife's face flickered in his memory the way grief always did, unexpected, uninvited. He forced his voice steady. "You know I'm okay, right?" Ava's brows drew together. Then she reached across the table and placed her small hand over his. Warm, certain. "You're okay," she said, "but you're not happy. Darius let out a breath. He squeezed her hand gently. "All right," he murmured. "Maybe I'm not happy, but I'm here, with you." Ava nodded, satisfied with that for now. Then she smiled mischievously. And soon she said, pointing at the rainbow with her. Darius groaned. "Lord help me." Ava giggled, and for a moment the apartment felt lighter. Then Darius's phone rang. A service call. His face shifted instantly, the provider clock taking over. He answered. "Hayes HVAC." A crisp voice. "Professional. Urgent. This is the Crystal Fork. We have an emergency with our cooling system. We're hosting a private gala tonight. We need someone immediately." Darius glanced at Ava. Tonight. He was supposed to help her with a school project. He was supposed to be home. But emergencies paid more, and rent didn't care about school projects. He hesitated. Ava heard the tone of the call. She always did. She stood up. "I can come," she whispered, already grabbing her backpack like she'd been training for this. Darius frowned. "Ava, it's late." She tilted her head. "You don't have a babysitter," she said, like it was the most obvious equation in the world. "And you said you need money, so I can sit quietly. I'm good at quiet." Darius sighed. He hated that his child had learned to be good at quiet. He looked at the clock. He looked at the bills on the fridge. He looked at the rainbow drawing. And he said the only thing he could. "All right. But you stay close. You hear me?" Ava saluted. "Yes, sir, Captain Daddy." Darius rolled his eyes, but his mouth twitched. A half smile. Ava noticed immediately, and she grinned like she'd just won. Manhattan at night looked like a promise. But Darius had lived long enough to know some promises were traps. The Crystal Fork sat on a corner like a jewel box valet, lined tall glass doors, warm, golden light spilling onto the street. Darius parked 2 blocks away because valet wasn't for men like him. Ava pressed her face to the window. "Whoa," she whispered. "It's like a movie place." Darius grabbed his toolbox. "Remember," he warned gently, "we're here to work." Ava nodded, but her eyes were wide with wonder. Inside, the air smelled expensive perfumed citrus, something smoky and rich. A host looked up, and the first glance was polite. The second glance was not. It swept Darius's uniform, his boots, his skin. It landed on Ava. His smile tightened. "Deliveries are through the back," he said. Darius's jaw flexed. "HVAC," he corrected calmly, holding up the work order. "Emergency call." The host hesitated, then gestured stiffly. "This way." Ava stayed close, fingers curled around the strap of her backpack. Darius leaned down. "You okay?" he murmured. Ava nodded, but her small hand slipped into his. That was her way of saying, "I noticed too." They were guided past a hallway where laughter echoed, then through a staff corridor that smelled like garlic and bleach and effort. Finally, they reached the service access to the main dining hall. Darius stepped in, and for a second even he paused. The room was a cathedral of wealth chandeliers, dripping crystal tall mirrors, tables dressed in white like snow. People in black tie and gowns moved like they belonged to the light. Ava's grip tightened. Darius felt it. He squeezed back. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. A manager in a suit approached, already harried. "Thank God," he snapped. "The system is failing. It's getting warm in here. We can't have that." "The Sterling Gala is—" "The Sterling," what Darius asked. The manager waved his hands like details were annoying. "Sterling Meridian Group. Big donors. Big investors. Big egos. Fix it fast." Darius nodded once. "Show me the unit." They led him toward a side door near the head table, and that's when Darius saw her, Vivian Sterling. She was standing near the edge of the crowd, a champagne flute untouched in her hand, smile fixed like it had been stapled onto her face. She wore a midnight blue dress that looked like it had been tailored by someone who understood power, but her eyes didn't match. Her eyes looked like someone had been turning the volume down on her life for years. Darius wasn't the kind of man who stared at strangers, but something about her stillness caught him, like she was bracing for impact. Ava tugged his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered. What? Ava nodded toward Vivian. "That lady," she said softly. "She looks like she wants to go home." Darius glanced down at his daughter, then back at Vivian. He couldn't argue. He turned away, forcing himself back into work mode. Because in Darius's world, compassion was expensive and he had a child to feed. He followed the manager into a utility door and down a short staircase to the mechanical room. The hum of machinery greeted him like an old friend. Darius knelt, opened panels, checked gauges. Ava sat on an overturned crate, drawing quietly in her notebook. Minutes passed. Darius was deep in the language of pressures and lines and failure points when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in a mechanical room. Laughter, sharp, mean. Then a woman's voice, smooth as silk, cold as steel. "You see, darling, the problem is that Vivian believes she's entitled to things she hasn't earned." Darius froze. He turned slightly, ears straining. The voices were above, bleeding down through the vents like smoke. Another voicemail, amused. Maybe she'd do better if she actually understood the business. A woman giggled. "Oh, please. She can barely handle a conversation without rehearsing it." A pause. Then quieter, the edge of cruelty sharpening. "She's a Sterling in name only." Darius felt his hands tighten on his screwdriver. Ava looked up, eyes wide. "Daddy," she whispered, "are they talking about the sad lady?" Darius's jaw clenched. He forced himself to breathe. "Keep drawing," he said softly, though his voice wasn't steady. He finished tightening a connection, but his mind was no longer on the unit, because humiliation had a sound to it. And Darius knew that sound. He'd heard it in school meetings when someone assumed he wasn't Ava's father. He'd heard it in offices when men spoke over him like he was invisible. He'd heard it the day his wife died and people looked at him like he couldn't possibly raise a child alone. Humiliation didn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it came with laughter. Sometimes it came with a room full of people agreeing you were less than. Darius closed the panel. He stood. He wiped his hands on his pants. And he told himself, "Not your business." But then a new sound drifted down. A glass set down too hard, and a voice finally. Vivian's quiet, controlled trembling at the edges. "I'm right here," she said. "You know I can hear you." A beat. Then someone laughed again. "Oh, Vivian," the male voice drawled. "If you can't handle a little honesty, how will you handle a boardroom?" Darius's stomach turned. Ava stood up slowly. She walked to him, clutching her notebook. Her voice was small. "Daddy, we should help." Darius looked at her. In her eyes, he saw something that scared him. Not fear, conviction, the pure kind, the kind adults lose. He swallowed. "We're just here to fix the AC," he whispered. Ava didn't move. She held up her notebook. On the page was the rainbow again, the three figures, the family. "I drew her," Ava said quietly. "I don't want her to be sad." Darius's throat tightened. He glanced up at the vent. The laughter above continued. And something inside him, something that had been tired for years, shifted into place. He didn't know Vivian. He didn't owe her anything. But he knew what it felt like to be surrounded by people who had decided your worth. And he knew what it felt like to be alone. He took Ava's hand. "Stay behind me," he said again. But this time it wasn't about safety. It was about decision. Darius pushed open the utility door and stepped into the dining hall like a man crossing a line drawn for him. The cold air from the vents kissed his skin. The chandeliers glowed. and the room for a split second didn't know what to do with him. Eyes flicked over. Some paused, some dismissed him instantly. A waiter hurried by with a tray and frowned at Ava as if she were a stain. But Darius didn't stop. He walked with purpose toward the head table where the laughter had been born. Vivian sat there, shoulders tight, chin high. Across from her, Eleanor Sterling, elegant silver-haired eyes, sharp sipped her wine, like cruelty was part of the bouquet. Next to Eleanor sat Grant Hollis, smirking comfortable in a tux like he'd been born inside it. And around them, investors, socialites, friends, people who held power like a toy. Vivian's fingers were curled around her glass so hard her knuckles had gone pale. Camille Reese leaned in, voice soft but loud enough to cut. "We're only concerned, Vivian, for the company, for the family," she said sweetly. "It's not personal." Grant laughed lightly. "Of course it's personal," he corrected. "It's her. She makes everything personal because she can't separate her feelings from facts." Vivian's smile twitched. Her gaze dropped for half a second, like even her body wanted to disappear. Darius stopped at the edge of the table. The manager had told him to stay out of sight. The host had pointed him to the back. The world had spent his entire life telling him where he was allowed to stand. But Darius had learned something raising a child. Sometimes you stand where you have to stand. Eleanor glanced up. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Excuse me," she said as if speaking to furniture. "Can we help you?" Darius didn't answer her immediately. Instead, he reached for a nearby water pitcher on a service station. He poured a glass. The water caught the light. He carried it to Vivian. He set it down gently in front of her. Condensation formed instantly, a small, human detail in a room full of performance. Vivian stared at the glass as if she didn't understand it. Then she looked up at Darius. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Darius saw something raw in her shock exhaustion, the edge of breaking. He inhaled. He turned to the table, and he said it. "She's with me." The words fell like a hammer on marble. Silence cracked open. Grant blinked, then scoffed. "With you," he repeated, amused. "And who exactly are you?" Eleanor's gaze flicked to Darius's uniform. A corner of her mouth tightened. "A staff member," she said, voice dry. "We're in the middle of a private event." Darius kept his tone level. "I'm fixing your cooling system," he said. "And I heard what you were saying." A murmur rippled through the table. Camille lifted her brows. "You were eavesdropping?" she asked, as if that were the offense. Darius's eyes didn't move. "I was working," he said simply. "Your words traveled." Grant leaned back, smile widening. "Well," he said, spreading his hands, "if the technician thinks Vivian is capable, perhaps we should put her in charge of the compressors." A few chuckles, not loud, but sharp enough. Vivian's jaw tightened. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to blink. Darius felt something burn behind his ribs. Ava tugged his sleeve. He glanced down. She stepped forward before he could stop her. Small, brave. Crayon dust still on her fingers. She held out her drawing to Vivian with both hands. Vivian stared at it, caught off guard. Ava spoke softly. "You look sad," she said. "But in my picture, you're happy." The room shifted again, because wealth could handle defiance from a grown man. But innocence made people uncomfortable. Vivian's lips trembled. She reached out slowly as if afraid the drawing would vanish and took it. Her fingers brushed Ava's, warm, real. Her eyes dropped to the rainbow, to the three stick figures holding hands. A family that wasn't about blood or legacy, but about belonging. Vivian swallowed hard. A single tear threatened, clung, then fell. Eleanor's face hardened. "This is absurd," she snapped. "Vivian, control yourself." Vivian's head lifted. Her voice came out rough. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "I've been trying my whole life." Grant's smile faded slightly, irritation showing. "Don't make a scene," he warned. Darius stepped closer, not threatening, just present, like a wall. He looked at Grant, then at Eleanor. Then he said, not loudly but clearly enough for the entire table to hear, "Ma'am, sir, you can say whatever you want about me, about my uniform, about where I belong." A ripple of discomfort. Darius's eyes sharpened. "But you don't get to do that to her," he continued. "Not like that. Not in front of everyone. Not for sport." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "Who do you think you are?" Darius didn't flinch. "A father," he said simply. He placed a hand lightly on Ava's shoulder. "And my daughter's watching," he added. That line landed differently, because it wasn't about Vivian anymore. It was about what kind of world these people were building. One of the investors cleared his throat awkwardly. Camille scoffed and looked away. Grant's jaw tightened. Eleanor's lips pressed thin. Then the manager rushed over, face pale. "Mr. Hayes," he hissed under his breath. "What are you doing? You can't." Darius didn't turn. Vivian held the drawing like it was a lifeline. Ava looked up at Vivian and smiled. "Do you like it?" she asked. Vivian's voice broke. "It's beautiful," she whispered. And for the first time that night, her smile wasn't stitched on. It was shaky, but real. Eleanor's tone turned icy. "This conversation is over," she said, standing. "Vivian, come with me." Vivian didn't move. She looked at Ava, then at Darius, then back at the glass of water, like she was learning right there in front of everyone that kindness could exist without a price tag. Vivian began. But her voice caught. Darius leaned closer just enough to be heard by her alone. "Breathe," he murmured. Vivian's chest rose. "Fell," she nodded faintly. Eleanor's eyes narrowed further. "And you," she said to Darius, dismissive, "return to your job before I have you removed." Darius finally looked at her fully. His voice stayed calm. "I'm doing my job," he said. "I fix systems that stop working." His gaze flicked to Vivian. "Looks like yours is failing too." A sharp inhale from someone, a startled laugh from another, uncertain this time. Eleanor's face went rigid. "Enough," she snapped. Darius took Ava's hand. He turned away before the manager could drag him out, because he had done what he came to do, not the HVAC repair, the human repair. He walked back toward the service corridor, heart-pounding, adrenaline buzzing like a live wire under his skin. Ava trotted beside him. "Daddy," she whispered, awe in her voice. "You were brave." Darius swallowed hard. "I was stupid," he muttered. Ava shook her head with absolute authority. "No," she said. "You were right." Behind them, the gala's laughter had changed. It was smaller now, less confident, because someone had said out loud what nobody was supposed to say. "This is wrong." And somewhere in that room, Vivian Sterling sat with a child's drawing in her hands and realized she didn't have to keep letting herself be broken. Darius expected consequences. He expected his phone to ring the next morning with the manager's voice telling him never to come back. He expected a bad review, a lost contract, a tight week turning tighter. Because that's how it usually went for people like him. Stand up and the world finds a way to remind you of your place. But the call that came the next day wasn't from the Crystal Fork. It was from an unknown number. Darius answered while loading tools into his van. "Hayes, HVAC. A pause. Then a woman's voice, low, careful. "This is Vivian Sterling," it said. Darius froze. He looked around as if she might be standing behind him. Ava in the passenger seat perked up instantly. "Daddy," she mouthed excitedly. Sad Lady Darius cleared his throat. "Ms. Sterling," he said cautiously. "Is everything all right?" Another pause, like she didn't know how to speak without armor. "I'm not calling to complain," Vivian said. "I'm calling to thank you." Darius's grip tightened on the phone. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Yes," she replied softly. "I do." Darius glanced at Ava, who was vibrating with curiosity. Vivian continued, voice quieter. "Your daughter gave me something last night," she said. "And what you did?" Her words faltered. Darius heard something in her tone that made his chest ache. Not flirtation, not performance. Need, real need. He swallowed. "My daughter draws a lot," he said gently. "She means well. She meant more than she knows," Vivian replied. Silence stretched. Darius didn't trust silence. Silence always asked for more than you could afford. Finally, Vivian spoke again, carefully choosing words. "Mr. Hayes, I think what happened last night wasn't just cruelty," she said. "I think it was engineered." Darius frowned. "Engineered how?" Vivian's voice tightened. "The cooling system," she said. "It failed at the exact moment they wanted attention on me, when they wanted the room uncomfortable, impatient, when they wanted me flustered." Darius's mind clicked. He'd felt something off in the system, like someone had forced a failure. He hadn't had time to investigate fully. He rubbed his jaw. "That's a big accusation," he said. "I know," Vivian whispered, "which is why I'm asking you something I never ask anyone." She inhaled. "Help me find out." Darius's stomach tightened. Help a Sterling that was like stepping into a storm with a paper umbrella. He looked at Ava. Ava held up her rainbow drawing in her notebook like a sign. Darius sighed. "Ms. Sterling," he began. "I'm a technician. I'm not. You're the only person in that room who looked at me like I was human." Vivian interrupted. Her voice broke slightly. and you're the only person who can tell me if that failure was an accident." Darius's throat tightened. He glanced at the bills on his dashboard. Rent, school fees, gas. Then he glanced at Ava. Ava's eyes were hopeful because she believed in happy endings the way kids do. Darius exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "I'll look." Vivian's breath released like she'd been holding it for years. "Thank you," she said softly. Darius hesitated. "And about last night," he added. "If my presence caused trouble, it didn't?" "Didn't?" Vivian said quickly. "It caused clarity." Then quieter, "I'd like to meet, to return something." Darius frowned. "Return what, myself?" Vivian said, then corrected, flustered. "I mean your daughter's drawing. I want to give it back properly. And I want to say thank you to her too." Ava mouthed, "Yes, yes, yes." Darius closed his eyes briefly. "Fine," he said, "but not at some fancy place." Vivian's voice softened. "Wherever you choose." They agreed on a time, a neutral place, a small diner in Queens where the coffee was honest and nobody cared about last names. When Darius hung up, Ava squealed. "Oh my gosh," she shouted. "She's coming." Darius shot her a warning look. Indoor voice. Ava clasped her hands dramatically. "Daddy," she whispered loudly. "This is destiny." Darius groaned. "Destiny better help with rent." Ava giggled, but beneath the humor Darius felt something else. Unease, because he had stepped into someone else's war, and wars always had collateral. Vivian Sterling walked into the Queen's Diner like someone entering a world without rules. No chandeliers, no curated lighting, just fluorescent bulbs and laminated menus and a cook shouting orders in the back. She wore a simple coat and no visible jewelry, but she still looked out of place like a swan in a puddle. Ava spotted her first and waved enthusiastically. "Hi," Ava called. "Over here." Vivian's eyes widened at the child's fearless joy. She approached slowly. Darius stood up out of habit, politeness drilled into him. Vivian stopped at the table looking at him like she wasn't sure whether to be formal or human. She chose human. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Darius gestured to the seat. "Sit." Vivian sat. Her gaze flicked around, absorbing the room like it was a different planet. Ava slid her notebook toward Vivian. "I drew more," Ava announced proudly. Vivian's face softened. "You did?" Ava nodded. "But I want to see if you're happier now." Vivian's throat bobbed. I'm trying," she admitted. Ava studied her with serious intensity, then nodded once like a doctor. "Good," she declared, "because sad looks heavy." Vivian blinked rapidly. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out the original drawing, the Rainbow Family. She held it like something sacred. "I wanted to give it back," Vivian said quietly. "But I also want to ask if I can keep it. For a little while." Ava's eyes widened. "Really?" Vivian nodded. "It reminded me," she said, "that I don't have to be perfect to deserve kindness." Darius watched Vivian as she spoke. No mask, just a woman exhausted by expectations. He cleared his throat. "About the AC," he said, getting back to safer ground. "Tell me what you think happened." Vivian straightened slightly. "The gala was a test," she said. "They've been testing me for months, putting me in positions to fail, publicly." Darius frowned. "Who's they?" Vivian's lips pressed together. "My Aunt Eleanor," she said, "and Grant, my cousin. The board likes him. They think he's safer." Darius understood safer immediately. Safer meant controllable. Safer meant predictable. Safer meant not Vivian. Vivian leaned in, voice low. "They want me to crack," she said, "to embarrass myself, so they can say, 'See, she's not capable.'" Darius tapped the table thoughtfully. "The failure last night," he said, "it wasn't random. I could tell. The system's logs should show who accessed the control panel. But that depends on whether the cameras—" Vivian's expression darkened. "The cameras cut out at the exact moment the manager took you downstairs," she said. Darius's eyes narrowed. "That's not coincidence." Ava had been listening quietly, swinging her legs. She suddenly leaned in. "Who would be mean to you?" she asked Vivian, genuinely confused. "You're nice." Vivian's eyes softened. "Not everyone thinks nice matters," she said gently. Ava frowned, like that was the dumbest thing she'd ever heard. "It matters," she said firmly. Vivian's lips trembled. Darius watched the exchange and felt something twist inside him. Ava didn't see titles. She didn't see skin color. She didn't see money. She saw sadness and tried to fix it with a rainbow. Darius wondered when life would try to teach her otherwise, and he hated that it would. Vivian's gaze slid back to Darius. "If you help me prove this," she said, "I can protect you from fallout." Darius let out a humorless laugh. "Protect me," he repeated. "Ms. Sterling, I don't even belong in your world." Vivian's eyes held his. "That's what they want you to believe," she said quietly. Darius stared at her, because those words, those exact words, had been stitched into his life too. He looked away. "I'll check the logs," he said finally, "but after that I'm out." Vivian nodded. "Fair." Ava grinned like she'd just watched two superheroes form an alliance. Over the next week, Darius did what he did best. He observed. He traced patterns. He listened to machines the way some people listen to lies. He returned to the crystal fork under the excuse of follow-up maintenance. The manager avoided eye contact. The staff corridor felt colder. But Darius kept his head down and his hands steady. He accessed the control unit. He pulled the diagnostic logs. And there it was. An override command entered manually. Not by accident. A deliberate adjustment that pushed the system beyond its safe limits just enough to make the room uncomfortable, not enough to trigger a full shutdown. The timestamp aligned perfectly with the gala's most public moment. Darius's jaw tightened. Then he checked access records. There was a name associated with the terminal login, not a technician, not a manager, a guest-credentialed temporary special request, G. Hollis. Darius stared at the screen. Cold air whispered through the vents above him. He exhaled slowly. This wasn't just family drama. This was sabotage. He snapped photos of the logs. He saved copies. He left without making a scene. Outside Manhattan, wind hit his face like a warning. He sat in his van for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, thinking about consequences. A black man accusing a wealthy heir. A technician with grease under his nails. Against a family with lawyers and influence. He could lose everything. He could be painted as a criminal. He could be crushed quietly. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. "Did you find anything?" Darius stared at the message, then at the photo Ava had taped to the dashboard, her rainbow family. He typed back, "Yes. And it's worse than you think." Vivian met him in a discreet corner of a public library, neutral ground again. No private rooms, no hidden cameras, just quiet and witnesses. Darius showed her the evidence. Vivian's hands shook as she scrolled through the photos. Her face went pale. "It was Grant," she whispered. Darius nodded. "And that means someone at the restaurant gave him access," he added. "This was coordinated." Vivian's eyes glistened. She looked up. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew I wasn't paranoid." Darius watched her breathe through it. Then he said carefully, "What are you going to do?" Vivian's lips pressed thin. "I don't know," she admitted. "Because if I confront them, they'll say I'm emotional, unstable, unfit." Darius nodded slowly. "That's the trap," he said. Vivian looked at him. "And you?" she asked quietly. "What do you think I should do?" Darius hesitated. He wasn't used to being asked that. He was used to being told. He looked down at his hands. Hands that fixed other people's comfort. Hands that had braided Ava's hair. Hands that had held his wife's in the hospital until it went cold. He looked back up. "I think," he said slowly, "you should stop playing by rules made to break you." Vivian swallowed. Darius continued, voice low. "They're going to call you dramatic no matter what," he said, "so give them something else to call you." Vivian's breath caught. Like what Darius's eyes sharpened. "Prepared," he said. Vivian stared. Then for the first time something like fire flickered beneath her exhaustion. She nodded. "Prepared," she repeated. A plan started forming. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but truth. The kind that frees you. Vivian's board meeting was coming, an event where the next face of Sterling Meridian would be discussed. Grant would be there. Eleanor would be there. Investors, lawyers, people who could bury things. Vivian looked at Darius, voice steadying. "I want you there," she said. Darius's stomach dropped. "No," he said immediately. "Absolutely not." Vivian's eyes held his. "They'll say you manipulated the logs," she said. "They'll say you're lying for money. But if you're there, if you speak—" Darius shook his head hard. "I'm not your weapon," he said. Vivian flinched. Then she nodded, accepting the hit. "You're right," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Silence stretched. Then Ava's voice echoed in Darius's memory. Sad looks heavy. He exhaled slowly. Let me think, he said. Vivian's eyes softened. Okay, she whispered. When Darius left, he felt the weight of the decision pressing on him like a compressor about to blow. At home, Ava noticed immediately. You're doing the face, she said. Darius sighed. The face, the I'm scared but pretending I'm not face, Ava said, too accurate. Darius stared at his daughter. How do you know that face? Ava shrugged. I have it too, she said. Darius's chest tightened. He knelt in front of her. Ava, he said gently, sometimes being brave means not jumping into danger. Ava nodded seriously. Then she said very softly, sometimes being brave means not leaving someone alone. Darius froze, because that wasn't a child's line. That was a truth the world tried to erase. He looked at her. He saw the rainbow. He saw Vivian's tear. He saw his own life, how many times he'd been left alone in silence because it was easier for others. He stood up slowly. All right, he whispered to himself. All right. The board event wasn't held in a restaurant. It was held in a Sterling Meridian conference hall that looked like a museum polished stone glass walls art that cost more than Darius's lifetime of paychecks. Darius didn't belong there, which meant he was exactly the kind of person truth needed. He wore his cleanest work shirt, still a uniform, still a statement. Ava wasn't with him. Darius refused to bring her into the storm. She stayed with a trusted neighbor clutching Vivian's last text to her. Thank you for seeing me. Vivian met Darius at the entrance. She looked different, still elegant, but something in her posture had changed. Less apology, more spine. You came, she said quietly. Darius nodded. I'm here, he replied. But listen to me, if this turns ugly, you let me walk. You don't beg me to stay. Vivian's lips curved faintly. I won't beg, she said. I'm done begging. They walked in together, heads turned, whispers started instantly. A black technician in a Sterling board event was not normal. That discomfort was the point. Grant Hollis noticed them and smiled like a man who thought he'd already won. Well, well, Grant said, stepping forward. Vivian brought moral support. His gaze flicked to Darius's shirt. A smirk. Vivian's eyes didn't waver. You remember Mr. Hayes, she said calmly, the man who fixed the cooling system you accidentally broke. Grant laughed lightly. Accidentally, he repeated. Vivian, you're still stuck on that. Eleanor Sterling approached, expression carved from ice. This is inappropriate, Eleanor said. Vivian, what are you doing? Vivian met her aunt's eyes. What you taught me. Vivian replied. Preparing. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. The meeting began. Executives spoke. Numbers were presented. Grant delivered a confident speech about stability and tradition. People nodded, clapped politely. Vivian sat still, hands folded, eyes focused. When her turn came, she stood. The room quieted, not with respect but curiosity. Vivian began, voice measured. For years, she said, I've tried to prove myself in the ways you demanded. A pause. But I've realized something, she continued. The standard was never about capability. It was about control. A ripple of discomfort. Eleanor's lips tightened. Grant's smile dimmed slightly. Vivian inhaled slowly. Before you decide who represents Sterling Meridian, she said, I want to share a truth about how this room has been manipulated. Grant chuckled under his breath. Here we go, he murmured. Vivian didn't look at him. She lifted a remote. A screen behind her flickered to life. A security feed, not from Sterling Meridian, from the Crystal Fork. The room leaned forward. Grant's smile vanished. On screen, a figure in a tux moved down a service corridor, paused at a secured panel, swiped a guest credential, entered a code. The timestamp flashed. Then the screen switched to diagnostic logs, clear, undeniable. A name attached to the override, G. Hollis. The room went dead silent. Eleanor's face drained of color. Grant stepped forward sharply. This is fabricated, he snapped. Vivian's voice stayed calm. It's not fabricated, she said. It's your login. Grant's jaw tightened. You can't prove I did anything, he barked. You're using some technician to... Vivian lifted her chin slightly. I didn't have to, she said, because the technician is here. All eyes swung to Darius. He felt the weight hit him. Judgment, suspicion, racism wrapped in professionalism. A man in a suit narrowed his eyes. Who are you? The man demanded. Darius took one step forward. He didn't rush. He didn't flinch. "My name is Darius Hayes," he said, voice steady. "I run Hayes HVAC. I was called to fix a failing cooling system at the Crystal Fork the night of the Sterling Winter Gala." A murmur. Someone whispered, "Why is he here?" Darius continued calm. "I pulled the system logs during a follow-up," he said. "The override wasn't a random failure. It was manual, deliberate, and it was tied to a guest credential." He paused. He looked at Grant, then back at the room. "The credential belonged to Grant Hollis," Darius said. Grant surged forward. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "You're going to believe a hired worker over?" Darius's eyes hardened. "Over what?" he asked quietly. "Over your last name," Grant faltered, breath-catching. Darius kept his voice even, but there was steel under it now. "I fix air," he said. "Temperature, comfort, systems." He gestured slightly toward the screen. "This system was sabotaged," he continued, "and the reason matters, because it wasn't just about making the room warm." Darius's gaze slid to Vivian. "It was about making her sweat," he said, "making her stumble, making her look weak." The room shifted. Some faces looked away, some frowned, some looked ashamed. Eleanor stood abruptly. "This is an ambush," she snapped. "Vivian, you're embarrassing this family." Vivian turned slowly toward her aunt. "No," Vivian said, voice low. "You embarrassed me, for years, because you were afraid of what I'd become if I stopped trying to earn your approval." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "You're ungrateful," she hissed. Vivian's lips trembled, then steadied. "I'm free," she corrected. Grant tried again, desperate now. "You think this makes you strong?" He spat at Vivian, dragging in him like some symbol. Vivian's gaze snapped to him. "Don't she warned?" Grant sneered. "He's a nobody," Grant said loudly. "A worker, a technician. He doesn't belong here." The words hung in the air like poison. Darius felt them land familiar heavy. He heard the echo of a lifetime of being sized up and dismissed, but he didn't break. He breathed. He looked at Grant, eyes calm. Then he said quietly, so quietly that the room leaned in to hear, "I've been called a nobody my whole life," Darius said, "by people who confuse money with value." His gaze swept the room. "But the difference between me and you," he continued, voice steady, "is that I know exactly who I am when nobody's watching." Grant's face twisted. Darius stepped closer. "Your problem isn't that Vivian isn't capable," Darius said. "Your problem is that she's capable without you." A stunned silence. Then Vivian spoke again, voice shaking but clear. "I'm done competing for scraps," she said. "I'm done being your entertainment." She turned to the board. "If you want stability built on cruelty," she said, "choose him." Grant's eyes widened. Vivian continued, voice rising, gaining power. "But if you want a company that survives the future," she said, "you choose transparency." She paused, then she dropped the final weight. "I will not be your heir under your terms," Vivian said. "I will not inherit a throne built on humiliation." A hush. Eleanor looked like she'd been struck. Grant looked like he'd been exposed under harsh light. An investor cleared his throat. Another executive spoke cautiously. "We need to review this evidence." Vivian nodded. "You will?" she said. "Because if you bury it, it becomes public." Eleanor's voice turned deadly quiet. "You wouldn't," she whispered. Vivian met her gaze without blinking. "I would," Vivian said. "And I won't lose sleep." The room was no longer a weapon against her. It was a witness. Grant's shoulders sagged slightly. He looked around and realized too late he wasn't untouchable anymore. Darius felt his pulse hammering. He hadn't just testified. He'd stepped into a story bigger than him, but it wasn't about power. It was about dignity. Vivian turned to Darius, eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered. Darius nodded once, throat tight. "Don't thank me," he murmured. "Use it." Vivian's lips curved. She turned back to the room. "And one more thing," Vivian said, voice softening. "The night you all tried to break me, a little girl gave me a drawing." A murmur. Vivian's eyes warmed. "She didn't know my name," Vivian said. "She didn't care about my last name. She saw me, and she offered me happiness like it was normal." Vivian inhaled, emotion rising. "I want to build something where that kind of humanity isn't rare," she said. Then she looked at Eleanor and Grant one last time. "And I'm no longer asking permission." The meeting ended not with applause, but with the kind of silence that meant the world had shifted. The fallout came quickly. It always did. Lawyers, statements, headlines whispered behind closed doors. Grant's allies tried to call Vivian unstable. They tried to call Darius opportunistic. They tried to call the evidence misinterpreted. But the truth had a stubborn quality. It didn't bend easily once it was in the light. Vivian didn't win the way fairy tales promised. There was no instant coronation, no perfect justice served on a silver platter. What she gained was something harder and more precious: choice. She negotiated from strength. She forced an independent audit. She tied board decisions to transparency policies that made sabotage harder. And then when the dust settled, she did the thing nobody expected. She stepped away from the role they'd been dangling like a leash, not in defeat, in refusal. Sterling Meridian could keep its throne. Vivian wanted a foundation, a structure that didn't require humiliation to hold it up. She announced a new initiative funded legally protected impossible to quietly strangle Sterling Works, a program investing in vocational training apprenticeships and small trade businesses in neighborhoods the board had always flown over without seeing. It made the elite uncomfortable, which meant it was necessary. And one afternoon, weeks later, Vivian came to Queens again. Not in a designer coat, just Vivian. She stood outside apartment 4B holding a folder and a familiar drawing. Darius opened the door and froze. Ava appeared behind him instantly. Vivian. Ava shouted, then slapped a hand over her own mouth. Sorry, indoor voice. Vivian smiled. A real smile. I missed you, Vivian said softly. Ava gasped dramatically. You missed me, she squealed. Vivian knelt slightly to Ava's level. I did, she said, because you did something brave without even knowing it. Ava looked proud. I'm brave a lot, she announced. Darius cleared his throat, trying not to smile. Vivian stood, eyes turning to him. I brought it back, she said, holding up the rainbow drawing. But it's different now. Ava leaned forward eagerly. Vivian handed it over. Ava studied it. Her eyes widened. Because Vivian had added something. Not a perfect adult drawing. Something simple. A fourth detail. A small glass with condensation drawn near the stick figures like a symbol. Ava looked up, delighted. That's the water, she exclaimed. Vivian nodded. It reminded me, Vivian said quietly, that kindness can be cold and clear and simple. It can be a glass of water. Ava hugged the drawing to her chest. Darius watched Vivian's face. The exhaustion was still there, faint. But there was light now too, not chandelier light, a softer kind. Vivian held out the folder. This is for you, she said. Darius frowned. What is it? Vivian's voice stayed careful, respectful. It's a contract, she said. Sterling Works needs HVAC partners, honest ones, skilled ones. Darius's jaw tightened instantly. No, he said. Vivian didn't flinch. I'm not offering charity, she said calmly. I'm offering work. Darius stared at her. Vivian continued, voice steady. You taught me something, she said. You don't need to belong to someone's world to have value. She inhaled. I want to build a world where you don't have to walk through back doors, Vivian finished. Darius felt heat rise behind his eyes, unexpected. He looked away briefly, swallowing hard. Ava glanced between them like a referee. Daddy, Ava whispered, this is good. Darius exhaled slowly. He took the folder. I'll read it, he said gruffly. Vivian nodded. That's all I ask. Ava suddenly grabbed Vivian's hand. Do you want dinner? She asked brightly. We have spaghetti. It's not fancy, but it's happy. Vivian blinked. Her throat tightened. She looked at Darius as if expecting him to say no. Darius hesitated. His instinct was to protect the small life he'd built from storms. But Vivian wasn't a storm anymore. She was someone trying to learn sunlight. He stepped aside. Come in, he said quietly. Vivian's shoulders loosened like she'd been holding them high for years. She stepped into the apartment. The space was small. The couch was old. The fridge still wore bills like battle scars. But on the wall above the table was something new. A place cleared. A frame waiting. Ava pointed proudly. That's where the rainbow goes, she said. Vivian's eyes glistened. Darius watched her take it in, watched her breathe in a life that didn't demand performance. Spaghetti boiled. Ava talked non-stop. Darius moved around the kitchen, grounded by routine. Vivian helped set plates awkwardly, like she'd never done it without staff. Ava corrected her with joyful authority. No, the forks go here, Ava insisted. We're classy. Vivian laughed, a real laugh. Darius paused mid-stir. He looked at her over his shoulder, and for the first time in a long time he felt something loosen inside him. Not because he'd found romance, not because life suddenly became easy, but because the world for one evening felt a little less cruel. They ate together. No speeches, no titles. Just three people sharing food in a small apartment, while winter wind tapped the window like a reminder that hardship still existed. After dinner, Ava climbed onto the couch between them with the rainbow drawing. I think she said thoughtfully, "We need to add more people." Darius raised a brow. "More people," Ava nodded. "Like friends," she said. "So nobody's alone?" Vivian's eyes softened. Darius leaned back, exhaling. Ava began drawing on a new page. This time she drew the rainbow bigger, brighter, and underneath it she drew not just three figures, but many, holding hands, a neighborhood, a community, a kind of family you choose. Darius watched, heart full and aching at the same time. He looked at Vivian. Vivian looked back. They didn't need to define anything yet. They didn't need to rush. Healing didn't like being rushed. Outside, the city kept moving. Bills still existed. Pain still existed. But inside, under the cheap apartment light, something had shifted. A man who'd learned to survive was learning to breathe. A woman who'd been raised under cruelty was learning to be kind to herself. And a little girl with crayons was building a world where happiness wasn't something you had to earn. It was something you could share. The next morning, Darius stood in front of the fridge. He moved a bill aside, and he placed the rainbow drawing in the center. He stepped back. Ava beamed. Vivian smiled softly. Darius stared at it for a long moment. Then, almost without realizing it, he smiled too. Not just with his mouth, with his eyes. And somewhere deep inside him, a quiet thought rose, gentle, terrifying, hopeful. Maybe we don't have to do this alone anymore. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been judged by what you wear, where you come from, or what people assume you're worth, leave a small message for Darius, for Vivian, or for Ava in the comments. Sometimes a single kind sentence is a glass of water in a room that's been too cold for too long.